So this talk is tentatively entitled Transforming Our World with Metta. So the founder of modern chemistry, Antoine Lavoisier, said, "Nothing is lost, everything is transformed." Now, he could just as easily have been talking about the heart and mind as chemical reactions. And transformation is possible. In fact, it's not the exception, it's the rule. And just as transformation takes place in a chemical reaction, we have the means of transforming our unhealthy mental states, our anger, our blame, and views of ourselves in our Metta Bhavana practice. And according to our teacher, Bhante Sangharashita, the object of meditation is to transform oneself, not to have good meditations. So through this process of working with our mind, we make it malleable. So in a way like a potter works their clay, so they can begin to make their pot. So to transform this amorphous mass of clay into a thing of beauty, they work this amorphous mass, digging their hands into it, adding water, making it more malleable, making it softer. And they do this preparatory work so that they can further work with the clay to produce sometimes amazingly intricate shapes or even very simple shapes, which because of this, their very simplicity, have a real beauty. So we work with our mind as the potter softens the clay, we soften our minds. And the water softens the clay, friendliness, love, metta, softens the mind and heart. So friendliness is the maester of our mind. But extending this to a similar metaphor, a baker working their dough needs to be careful how they work it. Too much kneading, too much effort, and the wrong kind of effort. And the end result, the bread doesn't turn out right. The right amount of kneading, and we have this soft, comforting loaf. But too much kneading, we get this heavy and dense mass that's not very appetizing. So in the same way, we work with the mind. How we work with the mind is very important. How we approach our metta practice in particular can make a world of difference to our experience of it. The Metta Bhavana for me has been very transformative, although my relationship with it hasn't been always smooth. Then my relationship with the world and those I share it with hasn't always been very smooth either. So life can be a challenge. And I think many of us are much more aware of this over the past year or so. The stress of lockdowns and not being able to see friends and family have taken their toll on even those of us who think of ourselves as resilient. It's easy to become hardened, emotionally numb by the difficulties we have all faced in life. It's easy to build emotional walls around ourselves in order to protect our hearts from the pains and sorrows and the sufferings that have been so prevalent in our world, and at the same time, so unique to each of us. It's easy to withdraw into our own cocoon and lull ourselves into a false sense of security. But at the same time, it's just as easy to lash out and turn to aggression as a way to seek a protection from, as the bard has it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and that eventually befall all of us at some time in our lives. So what was the Buddha's experience? When the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree under full moonlight before he gained enlightenment, it's said that he was attacked by the wicked forces of Mara. So just to remind you, Mara, the demon spirit of negative desire. So Mara is said to be the personification of all our hindrances and negativity. Our teacher has described Mara as the personification of the forces antagonistic to enlightenment. So it's something that sort of holds us back from progress. So the story tells us that as the Buddha drew even closer to his own enlightenment, Mara shot arrows of distraction at him in an effort to derail him from attaining enlightenment. While deep in meditation, the Buddha relied on his basic inner wisdom and awareness. He recognized the true nature of those arrows of distraction and turned them into flowers. So instead of being stumbled by distractions, instead of withdrawing or becoming overwhelmed by the attack and retaliating negatively, the Buddha turned the negative forces arrayed against him into something positive and beautiful. His basic inner wisdom and awareness gave him access to transformative power of metta, of loving kindness, if you like. So the deeper the Buddha's meditation, the more aware he was of the nature of the arrows, their source and significance. His meditation enabled him to awaken to the true nature of his own distractions, his own suffering. So for the Buddha, this insight into the nature of his own suffering also enabled him to realize his own inner wisdom and the potential for compassion and love. He also recognized that this potential for self-realization existed in us all too, that all human beings had the capacity to become Buddha or awakened ones, that we are all capable of realizing and expressing immeasurable loving kindness towards ourselves and the world. And to align with metta within is to align our consciousness with the very best part of ourselves. Like the Buddha, our loving kindness, our metta, enables us to become wiser rather than foolish. Loving kindness enables us to show grace under fire rather than feel resentful or aggression. Loving kindness enables us to open up to the world rather than close down in an attempt to run for cover or shield ourselves from life. Through the practice of meditation, we access our basic inner wisdom and awareness. And by doing so, we align our consciousness with the transformative power of metta, which exists naturally within each one of us. In other words, we are more able to connect with the very best part of ourselves, as I said. This is how we might turn arrows into flowers. Of course, metta cannot be examined under a microscope, yet it's the greatest motivating power and is found in every cell of our bodies and in the universe. But what does it mean for us? What does it mean to align ourselves with the metta within, as we align ourselves with the power of love in the universe? So the practice of Maitri, of metta, of loving kindness, is a powerful transformative meditation practice. It begins by taking the time to be aware of the compassion or tender-heartedness that we already are able to express within, and then we expand and develop those feelings. Sooner or later, life catches up with us, and we come to the realization that there is no avoiding our problems. There is no running away from our demons. There is no running away from Mara. There's no going to war to win over this life or force our way through it. It never lasts. There's nothing to grasp at in desperation. It only adds to our suffering, only adds to suffering in the world. So we come to realize, often through experiencing or bearing witness to suffering, that the only true option is to meet life with authenticity in all of its rawness, with an open heart right here in the moment. And meditation is the practice of not waiting until later, but gently and persistently meeting life as it is. And as we are in this moment, staying put, meeting our demons with compassion and gentleness, moving beyond winning and losing, letting go, transforming suffering rather than transmitting suffering. Then we have no need to go to war with ourselves, go to war with others or with life. Then we start to experience something of what peace is. Anger in and of itself is just energy, just like any other emotion. We're all human and we experience anger. And when the sometimes intense, hot energy of anger is put into responsible use, it can be beneficial too. Anger can be powerful, a very powerful motivating force in our work to end injustice, for instance. But our experience of anger can also be an opportunity to investigate what gets under our skin and eats at us, what makes us lose our cool. It can help us to understand how fast we lose our cool. Are we acting out of anger with our words and our actions, adding to the harm and suffering in the world? So let me digress for the moment and talk about anger, love, and transformation in terms of symbol and imagination. When we were ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order, we take on a practice associated with a certain Buddha or Bodhisattva. And when I was ordained, I took on a practice of Amitabha. So I had a particular connection with Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light, the Buddha of love. And that connection relates to the sound in relation to mantra, vision in relation to the contemplation of the Buddha, and meditation in that one's image that comes to mind on seeing Amitabha in meditation as he sits there, the almost archetypal meditating Buddha. And actually, when most non-Buddhists think of it, and actually some people new to Buddhism think of a Buddha, when it's not the little fat round guy, it's the meditating Amitabha they have an image of. So the image of Amitabha has this sense of instilling a sense of stillness, a sense of meditation, and indeed love when one sees it. And you can see behind me here a tanka of Amitabha. It's not quite red, it's become faded over the years I've had it. So his color is red. In Tibetan Buddhism, red is the color of love, of compassion and emotional energy. So what are some of the common associations with red? Red is the color of attraction, of passion, of warmth. It's also the color of blood, of arousal, also of warning signs. Many dangerous animals are red to warn others to keep away. The first, obviously, is that blood is red, as I said. So there is this association with the stream of life, something vital in our life. It moves around our body, carrying all these nutrients and oxygen. And blood is very much associated with vitality in the body. But red is also very much associated with the emotions, the warm, hot emotions. When we get angry, we say we see red, and our face often becomes red. And the more angry we get, the redder it gets. When we get embarrassed, our face flushes various shades of red. Passion is also associated with red, and that's another fiery emotion. But most of all, what's associated with red is love. The red heart is the most common symbol of love. And we even use it in the center for some of our posters when we're publicizing Metta courses. And it's very much in evidence around Valentine's Day. Then there are red flowers. And I was talking about my garden before we started. I have lots of red roses in my garden. And the flowers are usually red roses around Valentine's Day. It's easy to see the connection here between the attraction, fascination, warmth with engagement, because this is what we feel when we fall in love. Someone else becomes very attractive to us, very inviting, very alluring, and we're certainly drawn towards them. Also, when we fall in love, we get aroused. And I don't just mean sexually. We're very awake, we're very alive. Red is the color of emotional arousal. As we know, romantic love can feel incredibly energizing. We feel we can do anything for our beloved, perform any feat to gain their heart. Suddenly we find ourselves full of life, full of energy, very inquisitive. We're fascinated with the world around us. Suddenly we hear the birds sing, and they sing more tunefully maybe. Maybe we even imagine they sing just for us. Flowers bloom even more vividly. The sun shines more even when it's raining. Even babies become more cute and cuddly and kissable. No matter how we feel about kids, we float around apparently without a care in the world. So the heart is the seat of our emotions, and our emotions give us life and energy. The heart is full of red blood, which it literally pumps around our bodies. But at the same time, it pumps emotional energy around our spirit. But there's another side to all this. Red is also associated with danger and alarm. Warning and hazard signs are often in red. Fire is red. Dangerous insects and reptiles have large areas of red on them. Fire engines are red. In Christian iconography, hell and the devil are red. So red also signifies stopping, caution, taking care when we tend to miss. Well, we tend to miss this when we're in love. So these are all the mundane associations with red. But the love Amitabha represents isn't mundane love. It isn't the love that we're mostly familiar with. Amitabha's love is completely unconditional, unlike romantic love. Amitabha's transcendental love is freely given and expressed. There are no ifs or buts or maybes. Our romantic love, on the other hand, is quite fickle and particular. When our love pleases us and delights us, our love soars high in the sky, burning brightly. And which is what we tend to do at such times like this. When our love displeases us, it crashes down around us and we want to hide away in a corner from the world. Amitabha's love burns bright at all times. It's infinite, it's immeasurable, it's boundless, and pours forth for every single sentient creature. It's the Maha-Maitri, the great love. So the practice of metta can fundamentally alter our attitudes and understandings about our relationships with the world. In the same way, practicing the opposite can affect us too. Here's an example. Have you ever had the experience of having an argument with someone, but entirely in the privacy of your own head? I'm sure we're all familiar with that experience. Have you ever wondered who it is you're arguing with? Most of us never get that far in our analysis of ourselves. It's obviously not the actual other person that you're arguing with, since they're probably not present. And even if they are, then it's not the external version of them that you're having the argument with. If you think about it, you can only reach the conclusion that it's yourself that you're arguing with. One part of your mind, which you identify as yourself, and another part of your mind, which manifests as the internal representation of your enemy, are locked in a fight. The real enemy isn't involved at all. It might be interesting to ask who, if anyone, wins these arguments. But I leave you to figure that one out for yourself. But let's think about this a little more. There you are having an argument with yourself, although you think that you're arguing with another person because you're in a way hallucinating. We do in fact live in a state of hallucination. So this type of internal arguments have an effect on can have an effect on the outside world. Perhaps not directly, but indirectly. After one of these arguments, we may well be in a bad mood and take it out on innocent bystanders like our friends and family. And of course, if we meet our enemy, then it'll almost certainly have a worse relationship with him or her because of the ill will we've generated. To some extent, the enemy can be another one of those innocent bystanders even. This person has been away minding their own business, and then we inflict the negative mental states that we have generated in an argument with ourselves on them. So what can we learn from this? We could just simply learn the fact of this dynamic, that we cultivate emotions internally, and then those have an effect on the outside world. My example has been of negative effects of this, but I think it's easy to see the opposite positive effects of cultivating positive emotion. Sometimes when we're sitting in meditation, this distinction between inner and outer begins to blur. We begin to have a sense that there is less of a sharp distinction between these two worlds. To see, in fact, that there is really only one world that we unconsciously split in two. Sometimes there is no distinction at all, and our awareness simply constitutes a unitary field of awareness that lacks division into inner and outer, self and other. And this can happen in the Metta Bhavana practice. For me, this is most evident in the final stage of the practice. As we widen our sphere of metta, while cultivating metta, we are learning to widen our sense of ourselves. We're learning to leave behind a narrow sense of ourselves that assumes the best way to be happy is to look mainly or even solely after our own interests. So he stands in the glow of ripeness. It doesn't matter whether he knows what he serves. Who serves best doesn't always understand. So this imaginative faculty is an important component of our metta practice. Imagination takes us beyond ourselves. Think about the Metta Bhavana practice without it. The imaginative connection with others helps us go beyond this narrow self-view, to see things from other's perspective. It takes us beyond our present way of seeing into a deeper, more integral sense of how things are. So imagination is the synthesis of reason, emotion, and the senses. It engages the whole of our being. So every time you're talking to someone, watching them, or even just thinking about them, bear this simple thought in mind. This person's feelings are real to them, just as mine are to me. Let me remember that so that I can support their well-being. So this simple, emphatic perspective can begin to create a habit of empathy that can transform all our relationships with others and with ourselves. So the Metta Bhavana practice is part of the path to complete liberation from limiting assumptions, views, emotions, and behaviors. In Buddhist terms, this practice can culminate in the attainment of spiritual awakening or enlightenment. So in Bante's memoirs, he talks about the main issue with the spiritual life being the self getting in the way. Of course, we need to act out of a sense of self in order to make progress. But at the same time, the same self can get in the way, paradoxically, so stop us making progress. So Bhante talks about giving ourselves up to the practice. In this case, his case, at the time, he talks about his teacher at the time, Jagdish Kashyap, who he was traveling with. Now, Jagdish was a very modest, unassuming man. So Sangharakshita decided he would give himself up to the will of his teacher. So whatever Jagdish did, he just did. Sangharakshita did without question. And this is a way of living the spiritual life. So when they arrived in Kalimpong in West Bengal, and Jagdish told Bhante to stay there for the good of Buddhism, this is what Bhante did and was there for until he left India many, many years later. In a way, it's like Ananda and the Buddha. One of the interesting things about Ananda, now Ananda was very close to the Buddha, probably his closest friend, and he was with him for the last 20 years of his life. And for those last 20 years, Ananda was the Buddha's constant companion. And despite many of the Buddha's other disciples gaining enlightenment, Ananda didn't until the Buddha had died. Why? Well, maybe he wasn't concerned with his own spiritual development. He had a job to do, and he just got on with it. An amazing example of service, of putting the needs of others before his own. So I'm going to read probably my favorite poem by Seamus Heaney, St. Kevin and the Blackbird. There's several reasons why I want to read it. It is one of my favorite poems by Heaney, and Heaney is one of my favorite poets. But I've had a blackbird nesting in my back garden for the last, and I'm sure people are tired listening to me talk about, but I'd spent the time between morning meditation and this, watching the fledgling come out of the nest, and it's just been magical. So St. Kevin and the Blackbird. And then there was St. Kevin and the Blackbird. The saint is kneeling, arms stretched out inside his cell, but the cell is narrow, so one turned up palm is out the window stiff, as a crossbeam when the blackbird lands and lays in it and settles down to nest. Kevin feels the warm eggs, the small breast, the tucked neat head and claws, and finding himself linked into the network of eternal life, is moved to pity. Now he must hold his hand like the branch out in the sun and rain for weeks, until the young are hatched and fledged and flown. And since the whole thing's imagined anyhow, imagine being Kevin. Which is he? Self-forgetful or in agony all the time, from the neck on, out, down through his hurting forearms? Are his fingers sleeping? Does he still feel his knees? Or has the shut-eye blank of under earth crept up through him? Is there distance in his head? Alone and mirrored clear in love's deep river, to labor and not to seek reward, he prays. A prayer his body makes entirely, for he is forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the riverbank, forgotten the river's name. So Amitabha, the red Buddha of infinite light, symbolizes the same sense of giving oneself up to the Dharma. His mudra of meditation is a symbol of balanced effort and harmony, appropriate for our practice of meditation, but specifically our practice of metta bhavana. He is associated with transforming craving, drawing the energy from it, transforming anger and negative mental states into love, metta, maitri, and out of that the other Brahma Viharas, as Yanadara outlined last night in his introduction. So I'd like to finish by reading a contemplation on metta by Nyampoka Thera. Love without desire to possess, knowing well that in the ultimate sense there is no possession, and no possessor. This is the highest love. Love without speaking and thinking of I, knowing well that the so-called I is a mere delusion. Love without selecting and excluding, knowing well that to do so creates love's own contrasts, dislike, aversion, and hatred. Love embracing all beings, small and great, far and near, be it on earth, in the water, or in the air. Love embracing impartially all sentient beings, and not only those who are useful, pleasing, or amusing to us. Love embracing all beings, be they noble-minded or low-minded, good or evil. The noble and the good are embraced because love is flowing to them spontaneously. The low-minded and evil-minded are included because they are those who are most in need of love. In many of them, the seed of goodness may have died merely because warmth was lacking for its growth, because it perished from cold in a loveless world. Love embracing all beings, knowing well that they are fellow wayfarers through this round of existence, and that we are all overcome by the same law of suffering. Love, but not the sensuous fire that burns, scorches, and tortures, that inflicts more wounds than it cures, flaring up now at the next moment being extinguished, leaving behind more coldness and loneliness than was felt before. Rather, love that lies like a soft but firm hand on the ailing beings, ever unchanged in its sympathy, without wavering, uncovered with all response it meets. Love that is comforting coolness to those who burn with the fire of suffering and passion. That is life-giving warmth to those abandoned in the cold desert of loneliness, to those who are shivering in the frost of a loveless world, to those whose hearts have become as if empty and dry by the repeated calls for help, by deepest despair. Love that is a sublime nobility of heart and intellect, which knows, understands, and is ready to help. Love that is strength and gives strength, that is the highest love. Love which by the enlightened one was named the liberation of the heart, the most sublime beauty. This is the highest love. And what is the highest manifestation of love? To show to the world the path leading to the end of suffering, the path pointed out, trodden and realized to perfection by him, the exalted one, the Buddha.